Calvin? Say something. Thank you. Rayton? Rayton? Aaron? Bell? Shirley? Shirley? Alan? Cheryl? Shelley? Alice? Helen? Arius? Ruby? Bernardus? Jenny? Emily? Annabelle? Wyatt? Cindy? Nikita? Billy Stone? Chelsea? Wilbert? Wilbert? Felicia? Valen? Abelia? Juan? Christopher? Wesley? Greta? Winston? Audrey? Jocelyn? Leva? Miller? Okay. So, just to repeat what I mentioned yesterday in hygiene and safety class, because some people are not in our hygiene and safety class. So, the school, as I mentioned yesterday, changed the calendar, right? Normally, week 18 is final exam week, yeah, which you guys wouldn't know because this is your first semester, but normally in the school, week 18 is final exams. The school changed the calendar, and now final exams are week 17. With that being said, so we're not going to really change our schedule. We're going to keep our regular schedule, except week 18, you're supposed to do the exam in here. That's not happening. Your exam will be online, just like your hygiene and safety exam. Okay? So you'll have to check on the e-learning, the opening day, and the opening time. I can tell you now, just roughly, if I had my phone, just roughly, if I had to guesstimate, the opening day would be this January 7th. Okay, so your final exam will open January 7th at 12:30 a.m. Right, so the first opening period I can choose on the e-learning for opening a test is what I'll choose to open it on. So I'm going to guess now your test will be open January 7th from 12:30 in the morning, although I don't think any of you are going to be up at 12:30 in the morning doing your final exam. That morning, January 7th, we'll do the review for the final exam. Your final exam will be open the 7th, the 8th, the 9th, the 10th, and will close on the 11th. When you go to your e-learning, okay, when you go to e-learning for both study ingredients and hygiene and safety, you can look at the test. You can't read the test, obviously, but you can look at the details of the test. Okay, the quiz description will show you what day, what time it opens, what day and what time it closes. Understand? Don't miss the closing time, because if you miss the closing time, you get a 0, because you haven't taken the final exam. You're getting 4 or 5 days to do the exam. If you leave it till the last hour before the test closes, then that's your own stupidity. Okay? So I would recommend not leaving it until the very last minute to do the test, yeah? 4 or 5 days, do it at your leisure, but don't wait till the last minute, or else don't send me an email on Wednesday saying, oh teacher, I didn't know it closed at Tuesday and I didn't do it. Well, that's your problem, okay? Understand? Yeah, we clear on that? So if you don't do the test by Tuesday, don't send me an email saying, I didn't know, I didn't this, I didn't whatever. That's your own fault, okay? Understand? Yeah, very clear, huh? All right. Any questions about that?
That's just for safety.
Huh?
That's just for safety, or?
No, I just said for both this class and hygiene and safety. Please listen to what I'm saying. Both classes are both online tests, okay? Both classes all online, all right? Got it? Yeah? Great. All right, so last week we talked about China and Taiwan. We also started in on Japan and Korea, right? If you remember. And we finished off, well, we didn't get all the way through Japan and Korea, if I remember correctly. Does anyone remember where we finished last week? Was it around pufferfish? Farther? Katsuobushi? Kimchi? Kombu? Korean radish? I think we finished on Korean radish. Yeah, that's normally where I like to finish things, on Korean radish. Whenever I finish things, it's always with a Korean radish. Okay. So, let's carry on. So we're going to finish off South Korea and Japan today. Oh, I thought the screen wasn't working for a second. Just another one of my silly PPT things. All right. So we mentioned, so this is where we finished off last week, if you recall, right? So this, like I said, is very similar to the Chinese or local daikon or lobo, except that the lobo here in Taiwan is much longer. It's mostly all white, more watery, the meat, and the Korean radish is shorter, fatter, green top, and a little more dry, firm in texture. Okay? It's not quite as watery when you cut into it. So that's the Korean radish. This is something that they would use to make kimchi out of. And again, in year 4, when we do Korean food, we'll make fermented radish kimchi. We'll make regular kimchi, like the cabbage. We'll also make a bunch of other fermented stuff as well. Obviously, we won't get Korean radish here. We'll just use the regular radish they have here, because nobody imports Korean radish, so we won't use it, but this is what they would normally use. Mirin. So mirin is a really, really important part of Japanese cuisine. It's similar when we talked before about Shaoxing wine, right? In Chinese cooking, Shaoxing ji is like a super famous, quintessential Taiwanese dish, and that's made specifically using Shaoxing wine, right? So mirin would be similar to Japanese cooking as Shaoxing is to Chinese cooking. Okay? Now they're very, very different products. They're not similar at all. Shaoxing wine has quite a strong taste, very alcoholic, whereas mirin is a fortified wine made basically the same way as sake, but what they do is they fortify it, meaning that they add another liquid to it. So it's much more sweet than a regular cooking wine would be. So when you taste it, it's got a very light alcohol taste, but also quite a sweet taste. Okay. Now, mirin is used a lot for marinades. It's used in a lot of sauces, dips. It's used for curing salmon eggs. Okay, so they use this mirin for a lot of different things in Japanese cuisine. Sometimes different areas in Japan, for sushi, for example, or sashimi, they'll mix some soy sauce with mirin because they like the slightly sweeter taste of the mirin than the saltiness of the soy sauce. So they use it for a lot of different things and in a lot of different ways. This is it's never drunk. Okay, it's not a drinking wine at all. It's only for cooking. Okay, so this is sake and mirin are two alcohols that are very, very common in Japanese cooking. Sake, of course, you can drink, and it's very common to drink sake. Mirin, you would never drink it, but you would cook with it, similar to how you would marinate things with sake. Okay, so that's mirin, M-I-R-I-N. This is a critical ingredient when making sushi rice as well. Huh? So when they make sushi, they cook the rice, they dump it into a big bamboo sort of mixing bowl, then they start fanning it, and then they have a bowl that's mixed with rice vinegar and mirin. And they'll add some of that to the rice and mix it through, just enough to give it some flavor, but not so much that it doesn't stay sticky. Okay? So that's also a critical ingredient in the making of sushi. Okay? The sushi rice itself. Miso, also another super important aspect of Korean cooking. Or sorry, well actually it's used in Korean cooking as well, but it's more so important in Japanese cooking. This is a fermented soybean product. So this is made by taking soybeans that have been steamed, okay, or cooked, mashing them, okay, so they make basically a rough paste out of soybeans. Then they cover it with koji, which is, we talked about koji before, right? The red yeasted rice. Koji is the fermented rice, okay? Sorry? Well, there's red and white and black. So they take soybeans, they mash them up into a paste, they add salt, they add koji, which is a fungus or a spore. They put that into a jar. Well, normally what they do is they mount it up into balls or into little cakes, and they press it down into a jar, similar to like a kimchi jar, big glass, big ceramic jars. They press it down to get air out, because if there's any air in there, what happens is you might get bacteria growing inside, and not the good kind of bacteria that we talked about yesterday, but the bad kind of bacteria that we don't want. So what they do is they get rid of the air, and that helps to control the growth of the bacteria. The salt also inside that they put salt in, that also helps to control the bacteria, right? If you recall back to yesterday's class, hygiene and safety, about microbial growth, this might ring a bell. So miso is used in a variety of different ways. Miso is a fermented aged product. It's usually aged when you buy commercial miso, which is what this is here. You can usually tell by the color. The sort of light brown miso is usually only aged for about a month or 2 months. But artisanal or handmade miso is usually aged for 1 to 2 years. Not next semester, this semester, after your first semester of your second year, we'll watch a couple episodes on Japanese cooking and some other cuisines from around the world from a really good author, and she talks a lot about miso making, and they actually show you how to make it. So it's a very interesting product. It can be used in place of salt, so when you want to season something or add salinity or flavor to something, miso can do that. Salt has a very basic taste, right? There's no depth of flavor, just salt, right? Miso has a saltiness, but it also has a much wider flavor range, right? There's more to it than just saltiness, right? There's that fermented taste, there's that soybean taste. So there's a lot more to miso than just saltiness. So you can add this to ingredients if you want to add a saltiness flavor, but want something a bit more to it, okay? So miso is a very useful ingredient. Miso is used, obviously everyone knows miso soup, right? That's probably the most common, like everybody knows miso soup. Every single restaurant in the world, Japanese restaurant, always you get miso soup, right? It's like a water and miso soup, that's what they give you as soon as you sit down. That's probably the most common use for miso. However, in Japanese cooking, it's also used for a variety of things. It's used for marinating fish. It's used for barbecuing. They make a paste out of it. They brush it on fish and different things when they barbecue. It's used in some different kinds of sauces, again, to add depth of flavor. There's also a really interesting dish in Japanese cooking where they take eggs, soft-boiled eggs, and they wrap them in miso. So they take miso and they press it out with their hand, make a big disc. They put an egg in the middle and wrap it, and they put it in the fridge for several hours. And so after several hours, that miso has really penetrated the egg white, and so the skin of the egg changes color a little bit, and it takes on a bit of a miso flavor. So that's a very common dish in Japanese cooking, especially for breakfast. They'll often have one of those for breakfast, very easy to eat. So a miso egg is very common. And miso is becoming more and more widely used in Western kitchens now as well. Specifically because it adds saltiness, but also adds much more flavor than just salt. Okay? So miso is really becoming a critical ingredient, not just in Japanese food, but in modern kitchens now around the world. Mushrooms, also a large part in both Japanese and Korean cuisine. Mushrooms play a big part in most cuisines because they're easy to grow, they're very abundant around the world. The enoki mushroom, as you can see here, enoki mushrooms are very common. They're used in Chinese cuisine, they're common in Taiwanese cuisine. They also play a really big role in Japanese and Korean cuisine. Enoki mushrooms can come in a few different varieties. You will either find them in white or brown or slightly off brown. Younger enoki mushrooms, mostly that are cultivated in farms, okay, or industrial production of enoki mushrooms, look more like this. Tight packages, very thin stems, okay? In smaller farms or in wild findings, you can find enoki mushrooms that look more like this, where they're slightly thicker, looser bunches, okay, but they're the same species of mushroom, okay? Enoki, the top one here, I'm sure most of you from Taiwan, you know this one's very common in hot pot and stuff like that, right? It's very, very common. Throw a big bunch of it in hot pot and eat it after, right? So that's the enoki mushroom, E-N-O-K-I. Maitake mushroom, also called hen of the wood mushroom. So this is a large bunch growing mushroom. So mushrooms either grow in bunches or singles, right? You either get a single mushroom or in a family or a bunch of mushrooms. Hen of the wood mushroom is the same. It grows in a bunch, usually on trees or in cultivating farms, like in soil, right, man-made. They have a very, very light brown, almost grayish cap, very, very thin, and a very, very thin, tender stem. They're considered one of the premium or more high-end mushrooms in Japanese cuisine. That's the maitake. The matsutake mushroom, this is one of the most sought-after mushrooms. After truffles, of course, the matsutake mushroom is incredibly expensive. So these mushrooms look similar to Italian cep or porcini mushrooms. They have a very sort of, almost look like they've been painted. They have a smeared brown and white texture. The cap and the stem are almost the same size. Normally when you see mushrooms, the cap is much bigger, right? And the stem is much more slender. With this particular mushroom, you can see that the cap and the stem are very close in size, similar to like king oyster mushrooms. The matsutake mushroom is considered to be, in Japanese cuisine, the premium Japanese mushroom. These mushrooms can cost upwards of $1,000 US per kilogram, okay, in season, okay? So the peak season of matsutake mushrooms, the best matsutake in Japan, will cost you around $1,000 US per kilogram. So again, not as expensive as truffles, right? The truffles can run 2,000 to 3,000 to 4,000 US a kilo. And I believe I just read last week in Hong Kong, an Italian chef sold a white truffle, or one white truffle for I believe it was around 3,000 US, one mushroom. Okay, about 300 grams or 400 grams for close to 3,000 US. So very, very expensive. But the matsutake mushroom is considered in Japan to be the premium Asian grown mushroom. Okay? Shimeji mushroom, also common in many Asian cuisines. This is also sometimes referred to as the beach mushroom, B-E-E-C-H, not beach, like beach and water. These again can be found in brown and white varieties. These are also used extensively in many Asian cuisines. I just included them in Japanese and Chinese cuisine, or Japanese and Korean cuisine, because in Japanese cuisine they hold a special place in cuisine. In Taiwanese cuisine, Chinese cuisine, they're kind of just used as a mushroom. They don't really hold any significant value. They're very, very mild in both texture and in taste. So they're quite popular because they're small, very easy to eat, don't have a strong flavor, and quite delicate. Okay? So that's called a shimeji mushroom. S-H-I-M-E-J-I, shimeji. All right, on to cabbage. So this is called the Napa cabbage, N-A-P-A, Napa cabbage. This is heavily used in Chinese, Taiwanese, Japanese, and Korean cuisine. The reason I include it in the Korean cuisine is because this is the specific cabbage they use to make kimchi. Okay? You can't use any cabbage to make kimchi. The first time I came to the school, and I wanted to make kimchi with the students, I asked them to order this cabbage, and instead what I got was just a regular, average green cabbage, which of course is not possible to make kimchi out of, because as soon as you salt it, it becomes just soggy and disgusting. This cabbage, as you can see, it's got sort of an outer white stem on the leaves. The top of the leaves, the older leaves turn very, very green. But the inner leaves are very, very tightly bound, and they're more of a yellow color. This particular type of cabbage is fairly tough. And I don't mean tough like it's going to be tough to eat, but compared to regular green cabbage, which turns very, very soft very quickly when cooking, this cabbage can hold its shape a bit better. So that's why it's ideal for using for kimchi. Okay? This also grows really well in cold weather. Okay? unlike other cabbage, which grows not so great in wintertime, this can be grown in slightly colder climates. And if you look at the difference between Korea and Taiwan in terms of climate, has anyone ever been to South Korea? That's a no? So I used to live there, and about now, maybe in about 2 months from now, the temperature will be about -10. So very, very cold, right? Very, very surprising. After living in Taiwan and Indonesia, and then moving to Korea, it's like, oh, what the hell is this? What is this snow? It's snowing everywhere. It was terrible. But I like the snow. At any rate, Napa cabbage is ideal for kimchi because it's got a much tighter structure, a stronger structure, and it grows in colder climates. So this is a really critical ingredient in Korean cuisine. They also will make fresh kimchi, which they basically mix and eat right away. They make fermented kimchi, which they can ferment for a few weeks before storing. They also make other types of kimchi out of this, but not using chilies. So they use vinegar and quite a few varieties of different cabbage kimchis, all using the same type, Napa cabbage. Perilla, this is a flowering plant that's part of the same family as mint. So this is also fairly common to see in Chinese cuisine and Taiwanese cuisine. This is used extensively in Korean cuisine as a wrapper for Korean barbecue. There's another leaf that looks like this, but that's part of the sesame plant. Okay, so quite often you'll see this in Taiwan. Not so much this red one, but the green one. And they look almost identical. Perilla leaf and sesame leaf are almost mirror images of each other. The main difference is the taste. The sesame leaf obviously tastes quite strong of sesame, whereas perilla has a very herb-like taste. Okay? So this is not something that's eaten by itself, really. Sometimes you will find these fermented as a kimchi. Okay? We refer to all those things as, they're called banchan in Korean, B-A-N-C-H-A-N. So all these little dishes you get of all these fermented vegetable stuff, that's what they call banchan. So when you sit down to a meal, they'll present you with a big table full of these little appetizers. And they refer to those as banchan. They're not just kimchi. So sometimes you'll see these fermented or cured with chili sauce as well. But the most common way to see them in Korea is that they will be served to you when you go for Korean barbecue along with different lettuce, and you'll use that to put your filling in and eat it. Okay, that's the most common way you'll see that. That's the perilla leaf, P-R-E-R-I-L-L-A. Ponzu. So this is also a very, very common sauce in Japanese cuisine. It's a soy sauce-based dressing. It can be used for salads, it can be used for marinades. So basically it's a soy sauce-based dressing that has mirin in it, usually kombu, katsuobushi. They either use lemon or yuzu. Yuzu is a small citrus fruit from Japan, but lemon is also very common because lemon is much more cheap and much more plentiful, and when you juice a lemon you get a lot more juice out of it, right? So this particular sauce has a saltiness, a little bit of sweetness from mirin. It's got a little bit of a fishy taste from the seaweed and the katsuobushi, and then it's got a very tart, citrusy finish. So when you eat it or when you consume it, you get quite a wide variety of flavors, right? All these kind of salty, fishy, lemony kind of flavors. So like I said, this can be used for marinades, it can be used as an ingredient in salad dressing. Sometimes some dishes will brush this on fish or chicken when they're using it on the barbecue. Okay? So a very, very common ingredient in Japanese cuisine. Ramen, probably the most famous dish in Japanese cuisine. Although, as we talked about before, ramen is actually from China. Okay, not the dish itself, but the noodle. Okay, so this type of noodle, and this again in year 4 in your global culinary class. If you take it, we make this. This is from my class in the 4th year. So if you take that class, we'll make our own ramen noodles. We'll make our own ramen stock, and this is the final product that we make in class. So this particular noodle we call it a high alkaline noodle. So it's different than, for example, the noodles used in beef noodle soup. Right? The beef noodle soup noodle. Have you made beef noodle soup? No, right? I think I've asked that before, right? I'm curious to know what you've made in Chinese cooking. Like, seems like nothing. I don't know. Have you made fried rice? What the hell? Okay, tell me one dish you have made in Chinese cooking. Mapo tofu? No.
Pork liver.
Pork liver?
Yeah.
Oh wow. Okay. I kind of assumed that you would have made some like really iconic dishes, you know, really famous dishes, but pork liver is not one of them. Oh well, maybe that's the advanced class. Maybe advanced you get to make chow mein. At any rate, so this noodle is different. The traditional Chinese beef noodle is just a wheat noodle, okay? Flour and water, or flour, water, and egg, okay, depending on what type of chewiness you want to it, okay? This particular noodle is different because we add an alkaline product to it. In particular, it could be sodium hydroxide. In Japanese cuisine, they add an ingredient called kansui, which is a liquid, okay? Sodium hydroxide is a powder. The easiest way, now I've had trouble here getting both of those ingredients for some reason. The easiest way that I've done it is taking baking soda and baking it in the oven. And then when you bake it in the oven, you lose a carbon molecule. So instead of being like NaCl2, it becomes NaCl. So it's much stronger. So you add a small spoonful of baked baking soda. You guys know what baking soda is? Sodium bicarbonate, right? If you put that in the oven on a tray, very, very low oven, and bake it for about 2 hours. So if you weigh, let's say you take 100 grams of baking soda, put it in the oven, take it out after an hour, weigh it again, you want to have about 60 grams left. You want about 50% evaporation. And so what happens is the carbon molecule evaporates, and you're left with NaCl. Okay, so it's a much stronger alkaline product. You take a small 5 grams of that in some water, and that will give you the same effect as adding kansui or sodium hydroxide. So what this is an alkaline noodle. Okay, in cooking we call that an alkaline noodle. That alkalineness gives it that chewy, that springy texture. Okay, if you don't add just that one ingredient, the texture is completely different. Okay, so it's very important that it's made with an alkaline product. So ramen, as I said, very, very quintessential, iconic dish from Japan, although it is rooted in Chinese cooking. Once the noodles came to Japan from China, obviously the Japanese started to play around with it and made it their own sort of unique dish by adding miso and shoyu, also by cooking the pork fat until it liquefies so it becomes kind of milky. So they definitely made it their own dish, okay? But the noodles themselves are Japanese through and through. Normally when you go to Japan or when you go to any good ramen restaurant and you order ramen, they're going to ask you what kind of flavor you want. So as you can see here, there's shio, which is basically just salt, so that's kind of plain. Then there's shoyu, which is the Japanese soy sauce, miso, and then tonkatsu. So they're going to ask you what soup flavor you want. They'll probably ask you also, do you want it heavy or light flavor? Okay. And then after that, they'll ask you, do you want it light or fat? I always go for fat. So what that means is that they have a big piece of pork fat, okay, from the back of the animal here, and it's been cooking in the soup for hours and hours, so it's very, very soft. And what they'll do is they'll put it into a grater or a sieve, and they'll shake it into your bowl, and that shaking action will release chunks of fat into your soup. And so that fat will then dissolve into your soup and give it extra flavor, because fat is flavor, okay? So that's kind of how you order ramen. Shellfish, along with all the other fish we've talked about, especially in Japan, some of the more common shellfish they use in Japanese cuisine would be the giant Pacific octopus. Again, this octopus is not entirely native to Japan, but it's from the Pacific Ocean, okay? Northern hemisphere, so Canada, northern US, and Japan. However, I included in the Japanese portion of this part because in the North American part we already had lots of other shellfish, we had lots of other fish, so I figured this is great here. It's also very different in Japanese cuisine because of the way they cook it, the different things they do with it. So Japanese cuisine uses the giant octopus to make a variety of things. For example, this one here, this is a very common Japanese street food, something you would find sold at a night market. This is called takoyaki. This is basically pieces of octopus in a light batter that's been fried. Usually you find these things covered with Japanese mayonnaise, maybe some bonito flakes, something like that. So this is a very, very typical dish you would find at a night market, okay, or just sold on the streets. Very popular in South Korea, actually. I can't even tell you how many street corners. You know, in Taiwan, you go from one corner there's a 7-Eleven, and then in the next corner there's a Family Mart, and in the next corner there's another 7-Eleven. That's like in South Korea, people selling takoyaki. It's like there's one guy in this corner. Across the street, there's another guy selling takoyaki. Across the street, there's another guy selling takoyaki. Do you guys know each other? Are you family? Like, how do you even decide? Like, what is his better? Like, you know, they're everywhere. It's like I don't know. So takoyaki is a really common dish. Also tsunamono, which is a really common salad that you might find. I call it a salad because it's more like a salad than a soup. Common dish you find in good Japanese restaurants. This is made of rice noodles or glass noodles with a very light vinegar broth. Usually it's rice vinegar and dashi. And then also cooked octopus, and usually it's garnished with some kind of seaweed, maybe some cucumbers, something like that with texture. Okay? So this is a really common appetizer served in Japanese cuisine called tsunamono. Okay? Hokkaido scallops. So this is a species of sea scallops. Again, not native only to Japan, but I include them here because they're very commonly referred to as Hokkaido scallops. Okay, which is Hokkaido is an area of Japan, right? So even in in Canada, where I'm from, we refer to these as Hokkaido scallops. Okay. Usually, Hokkaido scallops have a slightly higher value than the same type of scallop found or fished in other areas. Okay. So regionally, they're very expensive. Okay. These particular scallops can range in size from small to triple extra large. Okay. So triple extra large would be about the size of my hand. Okay, like that. Okay, so they can be almost the size of a hockey puck. Okay, very, very big scallops. One box of these in like a 2L size would be about $100 US. And in that box you get about 11 or 15. Okay, so not very many. One thing with these scallops is that they should never be overcooked. Okay, because it's a very delicate meat, very high-end product, very expensive. So usually you cook them on one side, quickly baste with butter, and we'll do this in not basic Western, but advanced Western. We'll cook Hokkaido scallops, not 3L, but 2L. But so you can practice how to cook them properly. So usually they're just cooked on one side, and then just basted with butter, and that's it. Okay, because we don't want to overcook it. But very, very luxurious ingredient in Japanese cuisine and in many cuisines around the world. So that's the Hokkaido scallop. Horsehair crab. This is a species of hard-shell crab found in fairly shallow waters around the cold waters around Japan, Korea, and up into the Bering Strait. The Bering Strait is the waters between Japan, Korea, and Russia. So that strait of water that goes there before you get over to Alaska, we call that the Bering Strait. Okay? So in those waters, you'll find these types of crabs called horsehair crabs. They have fairly thick legs, fairly big claws, good tasting meat, fairly high yield of meat, meaning one crab produces quite a bit of meat. So for these particular reasons, the taste and the yield, they're fairly prized possessions. Okay? They're fairly prized crabs. Korean blue crab. This is another. This is also called a horse crab. It's another species of blue swimming crab. So we talked about before. When we talked about the U.S. We talked about one crab called the Chesapeake Bay crab, which is also a blue swimming crab. This is another species of crab that's also in the same family as blue crabs. It's slightly different than the one found in the U.S. This one can be found around China, Taiwan, Japan, Korea. It's the most fished type of crab in the world. It's very, very abundant. It's caught in massive, massive numbers. It's used extensively in Japanese cuisine to make maki or rolls. And in Korea, it's used to make ganjang, which is a marinated raw crab dish. So raw blue crabs are marinated in soy sauce and other ingredients, and they're eaten as is. So they're fermented crab. Very, very, very good. Actually, my wife goes crazy for these things. She's always on the hunt for them. She's like looking for them all the time. Where can I get those crabs? You know? Very, very quintessential Korean dish, actually. Very famous. If you go to any Korean market, you'll always see gamjang. Always. Kuruma prawn, also known as the Japanese tiger prawn, is a species of tiger prawn. Again, not native to the waters of only Japan, but also found around Indo-Pacific. Okay? However, the ones in Japan are highly prized because of their taste. They have a slightly sweeter taste than the ones found in warmer waters, like around the Indo-Pacific belt. In Japanese cuisine, it's really, really prized because of its delicate texture. It's got a nice, sweet taste, and often the size of the ones found in Japan are quite large. It's common also to see these being served as sashimi. So freshly caught, killed, and served right away. Okay, very, very common. That's the Kuruma prawn. Then we have the sakura shrimp. This is a species of translucent pink shrimp. So they're very, very small. You can almost see through them. They have a very thin shell. They're very, very light pink. These are found in the Pacific coast off Japan, in the Suruga Bay. They can also be found closer to Taiwan as well, off the east coast of Taiwan. They average about 5 centimeters in length, so only about that long, very, very small. There's a particular season in Japan called Sakura shrimp season when they're at their peak, the best quality and the most abundant amount. So this is a big festival in Japanese cuisine called the Sakura shrimp season. And there's lots of festivals and events going on to sort of celebrate all these shrimps that we were just taking out of the ocean and eating. But they play a fairly prominent role in Japanese cuisine. They're considered a delicacy. But they also serve a purpose in a few other Asian cuisines around Asia and Southeast Asia. So that's the Sakura shrimp. Uni, again, another very quintessential ingredient in Japanese cuisine. It's also used in many cuisines now around the world, again because of its value, because of its flavor, because of its texture, because of its price, right? So this is a species of sea anemone. It's in the same family as starfish and sea cucumbers, and as you guys know maybe from Chinese cuisine, sea cucumber is a very iconic ingredient in Chinese cuisine, right? Sea cucumbers are very valuable. So uni is a very, very prized ingredient. Japan is the largest consumer of uni in the world. Okay, so Japan is the biggest market of uni. Korea is number 2, and France, of all places, oddly enough, is number 3 in the world for consuming uni. That's how prized it is. Okay, it's got a very, very buttery consistency, kind of salty, very, very delicate to eat. The demand in Japan is so great that they import them from Canada and Chile. Canada and Chile are actually the biggest exporters of uni in the world. So Japan produces a lot of uni, but they eat so much of it that they can't, their own supply is not enough for them. So they import it a lot from Canada, because the Canadian uni is about the same as the Japanese uni, because we're on the same sort of hemispherical line, right, cold water. So the uni is imported a lot from Canada, from Chile. Green, red, and purple uni are considered the best, that denoting the shell color. So their shell color, it's lightly green colored, lightly red colored, or slightly purple colored. It's considered to be the best because once you open the uni and look inside the lobes, which is this, okay, inside, the lobes on these particular 3 colors are usually the biggest. So when you buy uni, it's sold in grades, right? So you get high grade to low grade. If you ever go to a Japanese market, or even in Taiwan, you can go to a really good fish market, and you'll see it in these nice, cute little boxes. Very, very nicely displayed, so that you can see the size of the lobe of uni displayed right on top. Okay? Uni is usually consumed raw, right, or fresh. Okay? 99% of the uni consumed or still eaten is wild, meaning that it hasn't been farmed. Like many species of fish and sea products, we have reverted to farming because the numbers in the wild aren't enough. But uni is quite plentiful, so 99% of the uni that we eat is still wild, not farmed. Hopefully it remains that way, but let's get some uni. Shishito, this is a thin, green, wrinkly pepper used in a lot of Japanese and Korean cuisine. It's quite slender, about the thickness of your thumb. It's about 6 to 8 centimeters long. It's got lots of ridges and curls. In Taiwanese cuisine, you might refer to this as a green dragon pepper. I don't know what it is in Chinese, I just know the name green dragon pepper. So it's a similar species to that which you use here in Taiwan. This is often served as a salad or grilled or very lightly broiled. So that's called a shishito pepper. Shoyu, again, we talked about soy sauce before, so shoyu is the Japanese version of soy sauce. And again, like I said before, we talked about miso in your first semester, second year. When we'll watch a program about Japanese cuisine, and they'll talk about the making of shoyu and how it's a bit different making shoyu than it is making traditional soy sauce. So traditional soy sauce is very strong, quite salty, very dark. Shoyu, the Japanese version, tends to be a little bit lighter in taste, in saltiness, and in color. Okay, so it's not quite as dark or black as regular traditional Chinese soy sauce. It's a little bit more of an amber color or light brown. Okay, this is particularly popular for use with sashimi. Okay, so that's shoyu. Soba. So this is a particular noodle that's common in both Japanese and Korean cuisine. What makes this unique is that unlike most noodles that are made out of wheat flour, this is made out of buckwheat flour. Buckwheat is a specific type of dark grain flour. So buckwheat flour is brown. Sometimes other starches are added, depending on where it's made. In Japan, they tend to use mostly only buckwheat flour. In Korea, they tend to add buckwheat flour with maybe rice flour or tapioca starch flour, some other starch to give it a bit of a different texture. Okay? It's very common to serve this in Japanese cuisine, either hot in a soup or cold with a sauce. Same with Korean cuisine. You'll often find these served cold with just a regular sauce, some sort of dark sauce, or hot as part of a soup. So that's soba noodle. Sorghum is a grain. This is a fairly common grain around the world, although in Korea it does play a unique and integral part of their culture. When Korea, or slightly around the Korean War, they had a food crisis, and sorghum was one of the crops that they started growing because they found that it grew very well in Korea. And so what they did was, because they had such a food shortage, this became a good crop, an easy to grow crop. They started to integrate this into their cuisine. And so this is now, although it's very, very common around the world, it's a very, very common grain used in Korean food. So they often make it into things like this, which is a rice dish. This is a mixed rice dish with soybeans and sorghum grains. Or they turn it into these sort of street pancakes. So they make a dough out of sorghum flour, and they fill it. They press it down and they fry it and then steam it like this. Also very common street food excuse me, in South Korea. It's a fried sorghum pancake. Usually it's filled with some kind of sweet bean filling. Very, very popular, especially if you go to Seoul. You'll see these stands all over the place selling these fried pancakes. So this is made out of sorghum. Very, very common, very heavily used grain in Korean cuisine. Samjang. Okay, so this is, anytime you go for Korean barbecue, you'll usually get a variety of different dips. One of them will always be this, called samjang. This is made out of a mixture of soybean paste, usually some garlic or onion, maybe some spring onion, chili paste, the gochujang, okay, and then a little bit of sesame oil. So this particular dip has a slightly garlicky taste, slightly spicy, and then kind of nutty from the sesame oil. Usually this, like I said, you get served with Korean barbecue, so you wipe your meat or dip your meat in the samjang and then put it into perilla leaf or your lettuce, and then eat it as is. And again, this we will make in your 4th year. Taeok is a classification of Korean rice cakes. So this is made by taking rice starch and making a paste or a dough out of it. This is then shaped into different shapes, so they use it, sometimes they make it into round discs. The most common, probably the most common thing, or the common dish that you would find is called tteokbokki. Tteokbokki is a really famous dish that you would serve at night markets or even in stands on the side of the street. And this is basically tube-shaped rice dumplings. Okay, so they make it into a long rope or a tube, and then they cut it, and they steam it, and then it's served usually with a very spicy chili sauce. Very spicy, actually. Too spicy for this guy. So this is a very popular Korean snack. It's really, really popular, especially for university students, for example. Most universities in South Korea, there's always, at the front gate, there's always some dude selling tteokbokki. There's a tteokbokki guy and then a takoyaki guy. Okay? So you can't escape it. As soon as you walk out, it's like, tteokbokki, takoyaki, I don't know what to do, right? Always one of those two guys there. Wagyu, I don't know, what do you say about Wagyu, right? Wagyu is considered to be the most high-level beef in the world. Wagyu literally means Japanese beef, okay? Japan beef, that's the literal translation from Wagyu. So again, this is a very, very high-end ingredient. Wagyu beef is incredibly expensive. It can cost upwards of 10,000 NT, so $200 or $300 for a single small steak. Wagyu comes from 4 different varieties of cow. So there's a brown Wagyu, black Wagyu, whole Wagyu, and the shorthorn Wagyu. In Japan, the production and sale of Wagyu beef is very heavily regulated. So when the cow is slaughtered, and we'll go into this a lot more in butchery science next semester, but I'll just quickly tell you now, when the cow is slaughtered, cross-section of the meat is taken out. They inspect it for marbling, which is the fat. They inspect it for color, the color of the meat. They inspect it for color, color of the fat. They also check the health of the animal. Wagyu cows are treated very, very well in Japan. They're often massaged every day by the farmers. They have a very unique diet. Sometimes the cow is fed honey, sometimes it's fed beer. So they have a very different lifestyle than most cows, which are just fed a bunch of corn and grass. And, in Japan, the growing and rearing of Wagyu cows is considered to be an art form. Okay, and so it's taken very, very seriously. Outside of Japan, countries like Australia and the US have now started to produce their own Wagyu. However, it's still considered very substandard to Japanese Wagyu. And there are some species of Wagyu, not species of, do you know what a prefecture is? Yeah, in Japan, they have basically an area that's called a prefecture. Okay, so like an area of a city. So Tokyo has different prefectures. Kind of like in Kaohsiung, right? You have Shaogan, you have Zoying, So these would be prefectures. So several prefectures in Japan that produce Wagyu beef don't even export it out of the country. It's so valuable and so rare that they only sell it in Japan. I, myself, I'm not a big fan of Wagyu. For me, I think it's too expensive. It's a lot of fat. Like if you've ever eaten a really big piece of Wagyu at a very high level of Wagyu, it's very, very fatty. It's very rich. So for me, when I eat, I don't eat a lot of red meat. But when I do, I want to have like a steak, you know? Like this is just like eating kind of fat beef, right? When I want to eat a steak, I want to eat a steak, you know? But I don't do it very often because, you know, so when it's graded, like I said, it's graded on color, fat color, marbling. So it's given a number from 1 to 5 based on the marbling and the color, 1 being the lowest, 5 being the highest. And then it's given a letter grade, such as A or B. So the A5 Wagyu is considered to be like, you know, the holy beef, you know, if there was such a thing. So this is considered to be the most luxurious beef in the world. Wasabi, also called Japanese horseradish, is a tuberous plant. Like I said before, we talked about horseradish. So in Europe, they use horseradish, which is white. And if you remember when we did our food tasting, there was a jar of it, kind of that spicy white jar we had here, yeah? So wasabi and horseradish are basically like brother and sister, or cousins maybe. They're in the same family. So this is something that is used extensively in Japanese cuisine, especially when you eat sashimi, right? It's used to add flavor, but it's also used as a bit of an antibacterial. So wasabi has a natural medicinal effect to it, so when you eat raw fish, there might be a parasite in it. Wasabi is meant to kind of eliminate that parasite, okay? Wasabi comes in a few different types. The main two types are Daruma and Mazuma. Those are considered to be the best. However, it is very common nowadays when you get wasabi packets, for example, when you go for sashimi or sushi at a sort of a cheaper restaurant, that wasabi you get is very likely, possibly, horseradish that's been colored green. Because real wasabi is quite expensive. It doesn't grow in many places. I know Japan grows it. I know South Korea, some places grow it. Some places in Canada now have been able to duplicate the growing conditions of Japan. So it's a very small commodity, meaning it's very valuable. Normally in a Japanese restaurant, this is how it would be prepared for you. They would take the whole wasabi root so that you can see that it's real, right? And that's a sign of quality, right? They're showing you like we only use real wasabi. And then this board here is kind of slightly gritty or rough. And they would start to just grind that wasabi very slowly to make a fine wasabi paste. Okay, so this is a really good sign. If you go to a restaurant and they do this in front of you, there's a good chance that you're going to have a very good Japanese experience and a very good bill. Right? Another very typical cultural thing when you get sake in a Japanese restaurant, so we all know sake is the Japanese wine, right? In really good Japanese restaurants, they'll serve you sake on a small tray, and they'll put the cup in the middle, and they'll pour the sake in the cup until it overflows into the tray. And that's a sign of like welcome or friendship, right? They're being a good host by pouring you so much sake that it overflows into your cup. So these are good, if you go to a restaurant and you get this kind of service, the sake overflowing and the wasabi being ground, you're probably you're going to have a really good dinner. I mean, unless you don't like raw fish, then you're not going to have a good dinner. And yuzu, as I mentioned before, we talked about ponzu sauce, the Japanese citrus sauce. So it's very common for Japanese cuisine to feature some sort of acidity. In Japan, when you get sashimi, it's very common also to have one of these served on the side. In Taiwan, you'll also see something like this served with sashimi. Usually that's a calamansi, okay, which is a different species of small citrus fruit. Because yuzu is quite expensive and it's not available so readily in Taiwan, so they usually serve with a calamansi. But yuzu is used in a lot of different ways in Japanese cuisine. It's used in different sauces, it's used in marinades, it's used as a flavoring additive for sashimi. Yeah, so that's about it, yuzu. And you would never really eat one straight. Like, you don't really see people just eating a yuzu. Okay? It's very, very sour. All right, we'll take a 5-minute break, stretch your legs, get some water, go to the bathroom if you need to, and then we will get on to Southeast Asia. All right, wake up, let's get going. All right, we're going to move on now to Southeast Asia. Quite often, Southeast Asia sometimes often includes places like India. However, in this particular thing, we're going to keep India as part of the Middle East and talk about that range of land as one unit, because their cuisine is more similar. So now we're just going to look at more like Southeast Asian countries along the lines of Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia, Cambodia, etc. So this region of Asia has a diverse and extensive list of things like tropical fruits, vegetables, sauces, condiments, spices, and spice blends. We'll be looking at areas such as Thailand, Vietnam, Indonesia, and a few others. When early settlers and traders began exploring new places to begin trading with, Southeast Asia was a location that experienced a lot of people coming towards it. Okay? A lot of Europeans ended up visiting or exploring or taking over places along Southeast Asia. As such, there's quite a lot of strong influences and ingredients from many other countries used in the cuisine in this region. Generally speaking, Thai food focuses on light cooking and preparation of food while using ingredients that have intense aromatic flavors and smells with also slightly spicy tastes. This is not to say that Thai food is simple, and it can be very spicy, but it's not always spicy. It's a complex unit of ingredients that have a strong focus on overall flavor, texture, and smell. Thai food can also usually be broken down into 5 categories, which are also the 5 different regions of Thailand. Many aspects of Vietnamese cuisine can be connected to some parts of French cuisine or other European countries. As I mentioned before, Vietnam was once home to France for a long time. Also the Dutch were in Vietnam for a very long time as well, so that a lot of these influences still ring true to the cuisine in Vietnam today. The cuisine is also enjoyed for its light cooking use, little amounts of oil and dairy, and its use of extensive fresh herbs to add flavor, color, and texture. Vietnamese cuisine is widely known for using lots of things like basil and mint and different kinds of herbs throughout their cuisine, either fresh, raw, in salads, or as final flavoring ingredients in soups. Particularly something like Vietnamese pho. Pho soup is the noodle soup. You'll often find pho flavored at the very end with fresh basil or fresh mint or coriander to add some aromatic elements to the dish. As I mentioned before, basil, this is used in many, many countries, and it's also used heavily in Southeast Asian cuisine. There are 3 main types of basil: Thai basil, holy basil, and lemon basil. Thai basil has a sweet, licorice type taste. Holy basil is a little more peppery, and of course lemon basil, hence its name, has a slightly citrus taste to it. So they tend to use different types of basil around Southeast Asia, especially in Vietnamese cuisine and Thai cuisine. Bird's eye chili. This is a very common type of chili. This is used extensively in Indonesia to make sambal, which is an Indonesian chili paste, also used a lot in Malaysia. It's used a lot in Vietnamese cuisine and Thai cuisine to make dips and tom soups and curries. So again, this chili is not indigenous to the region. It was brought over to the region, and then over the years and years and years, it's just been evolved into like sort of a small, very intense, very spicy chili. So this is used very commonly in Indonesian cuisine, in Thai cuisine, in Vietnamese cuisine, Cambodian cuisine, this type of chili. So that's the bird's eye chili. Bottle gourd. This is a medium-sized, light green skinned gourd. This is found in areas of Southeast Asia. It's usually used for curries or soups, in stir fries. It's called a bottle gourd because of the shape, right? Like a bottle, right? Another common gourd found in the area is called the Vietnamese loofah, or the sponge gourd, which is similar in shape, but it has a spongy interior like a loofah sponge. Ceylon spinach, or Ceylon spinach, is a vine plant that's used particularly in northern parts of Thailand and Vietnam to make soups. It's occasionally also used as a wrapper for food. Citrus fruits. So Southeast Asia has a lot of different citrus fruits and citrus products. We're just going to cover a few of them today. One particular one that's quite interesting is called the Buddha's hand, or finger citrus. So this is a member of the citrus family. It doesn't really have juice like most traditional. There is some liquid in it, of course, as the plant. But unlike most citrus fruits like limes, lemons, grapefruits that produce a lot of juice, the Buddha's hand is more fleshy. It has a very citrusy taste to it. It's a very unique looking citrus fruit though. Calamansi, as I mentioned before, this is a type of citrus fruit that's native to Indonesia, the Philippines, and some other East Asian places. This calamansi is used quite extensively in Taiwanese cuisine. Like I said, when you go for sashimi in Taiwan, often you'll get this served with your sashimi. In Japan, they would use a yuzu, but obviously here you don't get yuzu, so they use instead of calamansi. Calamansi is also used as a flavoring ingredient in soups throughout Southeast Asia. It's also used as a flavoring juice. So you might go to get a juice from a store, and it might get one fruit flavored with calamansi to give it some acidity. Okay? So very, very commonly used citrus fruit. One of my absolute favorite citrus fruits to use. It's really wonderful flavor. It's got a really sweet smell. It's got a really beautiful flesh, and it's got just a really nice sour taste. Not sour like a lemon, but a mild sourness and mild acidity. So it's got a really nice balance of sweet and sour, which is why I think it's probably one of the best citrus fruits there is. This is called a cam san. This is a green citrus fruit. It's a hybrid fruit from Vietnam. It looks like an orange on the inside. It's about the size of an orange. However, the outside is all green. Okay? Oranges are green and then they become orange, right? As they ripen. This never turns orange. It's always green. You just have to know when to pick it, right? And that usually comes from field or timing. So this, unlike an orange, it has a very rough skin. Unlike an orange, it's very smooth. A cam san is very, very rough on the outside. But it has a very nice, deep orange meat or flesh, and it's very, very sweet. The other one on the other side there is called the kaffir lime. This is used both in fresh and dried forms. So it's very common for the kaffir lime leaf to be used in curries. They add a citrus element to curry. In India, they would use a curry leaf, which is a curry plant. In Thailand, Indonesia, and Vietnam, these leaves are used to impart a citrus flavor into soups, into curries, and into different dishes. And then, of course, the actual fruit itself can be used for its juice and its meat. Okay, so that's called a kaffir lime. These in Taiwan are quite hard to get, but the leaves are very easy to get. Usually come in bags, frozen. You can go to the index store over there and buy it, very easy. So that's a very good ingredient in curries. Coffee. So this is one of the most consumed drinks on Earth. And in fact, in Taiwan this year, coffee outpaced tea as the #1 consumed drink. For the first time in Taiwan's history, coffee was more consumed than tea, which in Taiwan is like unheard of. Okay? At any rate, that shows you a bit about the market here for coffee. Obviously, Taiwan is a huge emerging coffee market. They have coffee farms in Taiwan, very small, but still. So coffee comes in 2 main varieties, Arabica and Robusta. Okay? There are other types of coffee trees, such as Liberica, but they don't really play much of a role in the global coffee chain. The 2 main ones are Arabica and Robusta. It's native to Africa, but it's played an important role in many East Asian countries. Indonesia has a very large coffee industry, both in consumer meaning, like they have a very large coffee culture, like they have lots of coffee shops and people go to coffee shops a lot. Vietnam obviously has a very, very big coffee culture, both economically and consumer. Vietnam is one of the biggest exporters of coffee in the world, not just Southeast Asia. But when I say that, I mean Brazil makes a lot of coffee and Vietnam is like here, right? But we're talking sort of like how China produces pork and the next one is much smaller, right? So Vietnam is like number 2 or 3 in the world, but the difference between production between Brazil and Vietnam is staggeringly big, right? And anyway, Vietnam has a very, very unique coffee culture. There's lots of specialty Vietnamese coffee drinks that are made that are very famous around the world. One of my favorite drinks is called Vietnamese cold drip. You also find this in Indonesia quite a lot, although it is from Vietnam. So it's basically a cold drip coffee that cold water is poured through coffee grinds, and in the bottom of the cup here is sweetened condensed milk, and then that's milk mixed, so you get kind of a sweet espresso flavor. There's also another one which is quite popular, which is called Vietnamese egg coffee, and this one I'm not a big fan of because I don't eat that much egg, but basically they take egg yolks and sweetened condensed milk or sugar and whip it, and then pour hot espresso into it and mix it. So it's almost like having a tiramisu and a coffee at once. It's a lot of sugar, a lot of calories. So if you're looking for a pick-me-up in the morning, the Vietnamese egg coffee is probably the way to go. Then of course there's also Kopi Luwak coffee, which is a very, very famous coffee. It's very, very expensive. It's made from the droppings of a specific animal. So the animal will eat the beans. It can't process the beans. It poops the beans out. Then they make coffee out of the beans. And they charge a lot for it. I've had Kopi Luwak, but I'm like, well, I'm going to buy a cat. I'm going to make my cat eat coffee beans. Then we're going to be rich. Anyways, as I said, Arabica and Robusta coffee are the 2 main kinds. Arabica is the highest quality in the world, and Robusta is the 2nd best quality in the world. Robusta is the most dominant type of coffee because it's easier to grow, it's more plentiful, it has a higher yield. Arabica is harder to grow, less yield, but better flavor. So in terms of the coffee world, if you're buying coffee, Arabica will cost you more, but it tastes better. Robusta will cost you less, but it's not quite as fine as Arabica coffee. Okay? Coriander, not native to Southeast Asia, but used heavily in the cuisine. Unlike a lot of countries, in many countries, they just basically use the top part of the coriander. In a lot of Southeast Asian cuisines, they actually use the root as well. They'll use the root to make a paste or to make a base of flavor, and they'll use the leaves to finish something. Okay? In a lot of other countries, they just use the top part and discard the rest. Okay? Coriander plays a large role in both sauce making, curries, salads. So it's an integral part of cuisine around Southeast Asia. Vietnamese coriander, also sometimes called Vietnamese mint, is the same species as coriander, but has a slightly minty taste to it. It's not related to mint, it's related to coriander though. Culantro, this is not to be confused with cilantro. So cilantro is one, culantro is another. The culantro is also a herb native to northern Thailand. though it's used extensively throughout Southeast Asia now. It's used in soups, it's used in curries, and it was brought to Thailand from the Caribbean by spice traders. So there's cilantro or coriander and culantro. Galangal, this is a rhizome. A rhizome is the family. So this is a tuber that grows underground, similar to ginger root. Right? Ginger root grows under the dirt. Galangal is the same family as ginger, although galangal is not as strong as ginger. It has a similar flavor profile, that sort of lemony spiciness, but it's not as strong. Ginger is very, very powerful, whereas galangal is a little more subtle in taste. Galangal is also a very common ingredient in curry pastes, in tom soups. It's used in Indonesia to make soto ayam or soto soups. So again, galangal, very, very common ingredient throughout Southeast Asia. Jasmine rice, this is a type of fragrant, long grain rice. When we talk about rice, there's varieties of different species of rice, right? There's one group of rice that we call fragrant rices. So basmati rice and jasmine rice would all be included in the fragrant rice categories. Jasmine rice is grown all over Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam. Usually comes in brown jasmine or white jasmine rice. Kompot pepper. This is a very unique pepper that is indigenous to Cambodia, and it's actually protected under geographical identification law. So it doesn't grow anywhere else that I know of outside of Cambodia. So these are a very unique peppercorn that grows on a vine. They grow green, and then as they age, they turn into different colors, like red, black, and even white. Okay? So kompot pepper has a sort of citrusy taste, as well as a sharp pepper taste, like normal peppercorns. It would almost be a mixture between black peppercorns and Sichuan peppercorns, but without that numbing taste that Sichuan peppercorns give you. So this is a very unique pepper. Kecap manis. Everybody knows this, right? Yes. Yeah, of course. I'm sure my Indonesian buddies over here, they all know kecap manis. So this is a sweet, thickened soy sauce product from Indonesia, although Malaysians say that they invented it, Indonesians say they invented it. I'm staying out of it. You guys, is there anyone from Malaysia here? No. Oh, you're from Malaysia, okay. So yeah, so he says he invented it, you guys say you invented it. I don't know. Let's just say that you both invented it. Malaysia and Indonesia invented it at exactly the same time. It was time, okay? It's a lot like in Taiwan, you know, bubble tea. Taichung says they invented it, and Tainan says they invented it. I don't know. Let's just say they both invented it. Anyways, kecap manis is used in a lot of different dishes in Southeast Asian cuisine. In particular, in, let's say, Indonesian cuisine is used, or Malaysian cuisine is used a lot for fried rice, like nasi goreng. It's used for the production of satay sauce, bumbu satay. It's used in a lot of different sauces, marinades. It's not really used, like you would never really use it just as a dip by itself. Although I have seen people use it as a dip by itself, it's not really used. Yeah, there's always one. There's always one. Yeah, I don't like it. No. It's not common. It's not common. I'm not saying it's not done. It's just not common for someone to use it straight as a dip. It's usually mixed with something else. Lemongrass. This is a species of plant in the grass family. It's a very, very popular ingredient now, not just in Southeast Asia, but around the world, obviously. This is used in particular to make different kinds of soups, like tom yum soup, curry pastes. When we talk about curry, especially in your fourth year, we'll go into a lot more in-depth information about curry, but when you think about curry, the main difference between curries in Southeast Asia and curries from India is that Southeast Asian curries are formed from a paste. Okay, they make a wet paste first. Usually it's shallots, garlic, lemongrass, kaffir lime, spices, chilies, maybe some shrimp, or dried shrimp or shrimp paste or something like that. So they make a wet paste. Whereas in India, an Indian curry is a blend of dry powders that are then added to liquid. So that's kind of the main difference between Indian curry and Southeast Asian or Thai curries, is the formation of the curry itself. Lemongrass, when you're using it, you should always be somewhat careful that if you're going to keep it in the dish, make it big enough so that people can see it and don't eat it, or cut it small enough so that it cooks and can be eaten as is. So in curry, you'll find this in large slices, or in fried crabs, which is a very common dish, like soft shell crab, which I had in Thailand, which is one of my favorite dishes actually. It's fried soft shell crabs, fried with lemongrass. They cut the lemongrass so small that once it's fried with the soft shell crab, you just eat it, and it's an amazing, amazing thing. So a very, very common thing. Pandan leaf, again, another very common thing found around Southeast Asia. So this is a sweet green. This is a sweet green leaf. So this is found all over Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia. This can be used in many applications. For savory applications, it's very common to find chicken wrapped in pandan and then fried. For example, in Indonesia, they make something called estelar, right? Estelar. It is Nancy Ketchup Manis. Okay, 15 seconds. So, they make estelar, which is usually a mixture of different kinds of sweet ingredients like grass jelly, and then pandan is usually found in that dessert in the form of coconut pandan syrup, which is coconut syrup that's flavored with pandan juice or liquid. Okay, so it's a light green kind of syrupy sweet additive that they make with this estelar dessert. Usually it's got ice in it and all kinds of different fruit. So it's sort of like similar to like in Taiwan, you have the shaved ice with mango or red bean on top. Estelar is similar, that it's got some ice product or some sort of cold component, and then a variety of different garnishes to flavor that. Okay? But pandan is used in a variety of different ways, not just in Indonesia, or estelar, but also throughout Southeast Asia, and even in Taiwan it's used as well. Piper lolot is a green plant. This is used around different countries in Southeast Asia. It's very common when you're having a barbecue, for example, in Vietnam or Thailand. You have barbecue pieces of meat or fish or even dumplings. And then they would wrap that, similar to the perilla leaf in Korea, you would wrap your meat or your fish in a piece of Piper lolot and then eat it as is. Sauces. Oh, Southeast Asia has so many sauces. So we obviously can't go to all of them now, but we'll talk about a few of them, especially some of the more famous ones that are found outside of their home countries. Nam Prik is a Thai-style chili sauce. This is made from fresh chilies, usually some garlic, some lime juice, and some form of dried shrimp or dried fish. It's usually made in a mortar and pestle. Okay, so a big clay bowl and a clay rod that's used to grind all of these ingredients together until you get a sauce similar to that. You can also get Nam Prik that's also red colored that has tomato in it. Okay, but quite often Nam Prik like this is quite brown because of the dried shrimp or dried fish that goes into it, depending on the ingredients that go into it. Nam Pla is a Vietnamese sauce. It's also called Nuoc Mam in, Nam Pla is from Thailand, but in Vietnam they call it Nuoc Mam. Basically it's fish sauce, okay? So Thai fish sauce or Vietnamese fish sauce. In Korea they have a completely different fish sauce. So these fish sauces are all different wherever you go. And even in the countries, you'll get different types of fish sauce. So some fish sauces are used for certain things, some fish sauces are used for other things, because they have a different flavor, a different strength, a different body to them. Okay? You can't just use, in a pinch you can use fish sauce for anything. Okay? But if you want to make authentic food, you need to use the right fish sauce for the right dish. Okay? So when we make nuoc cham in a different class, but we use Vietnamese fish sauce for that, and when we make kimchi, we get Korean fish sauce for that. So fish sauce is basically just made by fermenting fish. So salted fish is put into a jar or a canister, and then it's left to ferment for a few weeks, even for years. Okay, and so that fish sauce, after a few years, has a much more intense flavor. Okay, much deeper flavor than just regular fish sauce, okay, or commercial fish sauce. When you're using fish sauce, you need to be somewhat careful though, because if you add too much, you can really overpower a dish. Okay, it's great until a point, and then it's too much. Okay? This again can be used in place of salt. Okay? If you want to add saltiness to something, like I mentioned before about miso, adding miso to something will give you a saltiness but also flavor. If you want to add saltiness to a dish but also get some elevated flavor, you can use fish sauce to heighten the flavor of your dish. Okay? But it's got a more full-bodied flavor than just regular salt. All right? So nuoc cham is a very common dipping sauce from Vietnam. This can be made in a few different ways. The way that I've seen it most is fish sauce, sugar, lime, and water. Although I have seen it made, and I often make it using chopped chilies and coconut water as well. Instead of just water, I like to add coconut water because again, it gives it a little bit of sweetness, gives it a bit of flavor. So this is a very common dipping sauce. This can be very common to serve with spring rolls, fresh spring rolls. Okay, so rice paper, rice noodles, prawns, maybe some pork, fresh basil, coriander rolled up, nuoc cham. Perfect combination. Or even shrimp dumplings called chow tam would be very good also with this dipping sauce. Sambal, their favorite. Maybe your favorite too. So this is an Indonesian chili sauce, chili paste really. And this can be made from red or green chili, so you can either buy red sambal or green sambal. And they're used for different things. For example, if you want to make nasi goreng, you would use red sambal. If you wanted to make fried oxtail or fried stewed beef, you would usually use normally you use a green sambal. And the difference is basically just one is using red chili, one using green chili. Usually there's shallots, garlic, ginger, maybe some dried shrimp or fish paste in there as well. And this is used for marinades, it's used for sauces, it's used for dips, it's used in a wide variety of things. When I worked in Indonesia, this is kind of a side story, but it's kind of weird. So I worked in Indonesia, I worked for a big restaurant company in Indonesia. And so maybe I told you this, right? I don't know, but I went to one restaurant, my boss said, oh, the nasi goreng, it's all wrong. It's not right, we have to make it again, we have to do it again. And I said, well, I don't know what you're talking about. So he said, okay, go to my mom's house, and my aunt, my nanny, you know, the lady that like cleans their house, she's going to show you how to make the nasi goreng. And I was like, what? You want me to go to your mom's house so that your aunt, who's your real nanny, can show me how to make nasi goreng? Why me? Like why not one of the Indonesian guys who works there? He's like, no, I want you to see how it's made, so you know we get it right. You know? I said, okay. So I get my driver, he drives me over to my boss's mom's house. I just show up at the door, I'm like, hey, your son sent me over here. Like your nanny's supposed to show me how to make nasi goreng or something. She's like, oh yes, we've been waiting for you. Right, this is gonna be weird, you know. I go in and there's this old lady. She's there. She's got all the stuff. She shows me how to make it. I said, okay, great. Thank you very much. I leave. I go back to work the next day. I show our team of chefs, okay, this is apparently how you have to make it. So I show them everything step by step how to make the nasi goreng, from making the sambal paste to the satay sauce to everything. Okay, the pickled vegetables, what are they called? Achara, yeah, the pickled vegetables, all this stuff, right? Everything from scratch, right? So then I show them, okay, great. So now we make it in all the restaurants, right? But my company that I worked for had 3 bosses. So one boss sent me to his mom's house. Another boss comes in and says, oh, I don't like this. It's not right. I said, oh, come on. But I just went to his mom's house. And he said, this is the way we're supposed to make it. He's like, no, this is how we make it. He's like, no, it's got to be, there's not enough sambal in there. It's got to be like fiery red. It's got to be red. More sambal. Oh my God, okay. So then I tell all the guys, okay, when you make it, more sambal. It's got to be fiery red. So then we start making it all, right? And we're talking about 20 restaurants in Jakarta, right? All making now fiery red sambal. And then the third boss calls me and said, hey, what's going on with the nasi goreng? I said, I don't know what. I said, it's so spicy. You know what? You 3 figure out what you want, and then you tell me what to do, all right? And I'm not going back to his mom's house again. That's for sure. Anyways, sambal, wonderful ingredient. I've always, since I've taught it at school, I've always had Indonesian students who, whenever they go home, they know I love sambal, red and green. They know I love red and green sambal, so they always usually bring me sambal, which is great. I'm not saying anything. I'm not saying you should get me something. Just clear my throat. Give me something in my eye too. So that's sambal. Wonderful ingredient. Of course, you know, if you go to Index and get sambal, it's terrible. It's like probably ABC brand, right? The worst of the worst, right? ABC. Terrible. So that's sambal. Very, very integral ingredient in both Malaysian cooking and Indonesian cooking. Tropical fruits. So again, we talked about citrus fruit, right? Southeast Asia is home to an abundance of different kinds of citrus fruit. And of course, what the heck? Well, that's weird. My PPT is out of order. Thai eggplant. There we go. So, after sauces, we talk about Thai eggplants. We talked before about eggplants. We talked about Italian cuisine and European cuisine. Thai eggplants are also a very integral part of Thai cooking. They're sort of smaller, rougher, green, rounded eggplants. They usually, as you can see here, have sort of a speckled white bottom, or they can even be entirely almost all white. Their size can also range from about a golf ball size to about a grapefruit size, so slightly bigger. There's also a species called the pea eggplant, which is very, very small, about the size of a marble, which you'll often find whole or cut in half in curry or in soups, okay? So there's a few different varieties of Thai eggplants, but very, very common ingredient used throughout the region. Now, tropical fruits. So we have an abundance of tropical fruits throughout Southeast Asia. Let's look at a few of them. Kaimito, so this is also called a star apple. This is a fruit found in different regions, not in Indonesia, I don't think. I've never seen one, but no. But this is found in different parts of Southeast Asia. Kaimito, it's also called a star fruit. You can find it in purple, brown, or yellow. It can be eaten raw. It can also be made into a dessert. And often the leaves are dried and made into tea. Coconut. Everybody knows coconut. Though coconut is not specifically native to Southeast Asia, most genetic research on coconuts would dictate that the belt, the Indo-Pacific belt, so kind of this area here, this is what we call the Indo-Pacific belt. So right around where Indonesia is, and Borneo and all that, and Papua New Guinea, that area of land or water is called the Indo-Pacific belt. Most genetic research shows that coconuts most likely came from that area and then were propagated by the Australasian people, the native, travelers in the boats, which is why we have native Australians, Maoris, Polynesians, all these people who have traveled throughout Southeast Asia on boats a long time ago. Most likely took coconuts and propagated them in different areas. Okay, so they eventually made their way around to the Caribbean. Okay, coconuts are a very amazing fruit. They're used for their water. Coconut water is considered to be really, really healthy. It's an ultra hydrator. So if you're feeling dehydrated, coconut water is excellent for rehydrating you. They're also used for their coconut milk, their coconut cream, their fresh meat, their dried meat. Their shells can be used for a lot of different things after, mostly ornamental, of course, right? So they're a very widely used product for a variety of reasons. Obviously in Southeast Asia, coconut milk is used in a lot of different sauces in Indonesia, a lot of different desserts. It's used in curries and soups in Thailand and Vietnam. So the milk itself is highly prized, highly used in a variety of different aspects of the cuisine, not just savory, but also a lot of sweet applications as well. Coconuts are also very hard to get over, that's for sure. Durian, oh durian. Durian is a fruit native to Sumatra and Borneo. So again, that Indo-Pacific area over here is where durian is native to. Durian has become fairly famous in recent years. So durian on the outside is sort of a light green, light yellow color, very spiky. The inside flesh is also sort of a whitish yellow color. It's got a sweet, kind of creamy flavor. Now, durian is fairly famous because a lot of places ban it, right? Because it's got a very strong smell. So in a lot of hotels, a lot of airports, you are not allowed to bring durian inside the doors because the smell can be very, very pungent. And it can travel great distances. So one durian can smell up an entire airport. So durian is quite famous for that reason. Jackfruit. So this looks similar in a way to durian. It's got a sort of a greenish, spiky skin, yellow or orangish interior. Basically, when you eat a jackfruit, you pull out the segments of fruit and then pull out the internal membrane and then eat the yellow parts. Okay? This is commonly eaten raw. It's also very common to find it canned jackfruit. Although, of course, canned jackfruit is not as good. Mangosteen. So this is a species of evergreen tree that produces an edible fruit. The edible fruit is the inside white part here. So the purple skin, which is called the exocarp, needs to be removed, and then the internal white area can be eaten. Okay, so that's called a mangosteen. The flavor of a mangosteen is kind of banana-like. It's got kind of a sweet banana kind of like taste and texture. Pomelo. This is also native to Southeast Asia. Although in Taiwan it's very common to use this at different festivals around the year, or put it on a cat's head once it's been hollowed out. So this is a fruit that's native to Southeast Asia. It's also one of the largest citrus fruits. So some pomelos can get very, very big, almost the size of a melon. They come in pink and yellow varieties. And as I said, they're popular throughout Southeast Asia for festive occasions. What's in Taiwan? What do they have? Is it Moon Festival? For the pomelo on the head? The Moon? Yeah, Moon Festival, right? Yeah. I remember once my friend took, when I first moved to Taiwan, and he took me to like Moon Festival, and he's like, we're going to barbecue. I was like, great. He showed me the barbecue. I was like, God damn it. It's like way down here, you know? I'm like, this isn't barbecue. this is not barbecue. Barbecue is like this. Right? Not like this. And so I was like, you guys barbecue. I'm sitting drink. And then he came in and said, look at my cat. I'm wearing a pomelo. Why would you stick a pomelo on a cat's head? He's like, it looks funny. I'm like, I'm sure the cat thinks it looks hilarious. At any rate, a pomelo is a hybrid fruit, meaning that two fruits were merged together to produce a pomelo. Okay, which is a very common practice called grafting. Rambutan is an edible fruit from a subtropical evergreen tree. Again, the same family of tree that produces the mangosteen, an evergreen tree, different species. This is native to Indonesia and Malaysia originally, but now it's propagated all over Southeast Asia and even in North America. Rambutan is grown, and even in Central America and South America. The outside fruit can be red or yellowish, kind of furry, looking, it almost looks like something you get from the ocean. Get like a sea anemone or something like that, right? Obviously, the outside skin you discard. The outside skin can be dried and used for things, other things, and the inside, the white or off-white fleshy part is what you would eat or turn into juice. It's got a very similar taste to lychee, okay? Similar, okay, which is a very common ingredient in Taiwan, lychee. Snake fruit. So this is a fruit that comes from a species of palm tree. It's native to Indonesia, areas around Sumatra and the island of Java. The fruit has kind of a reddish, brownish skin on the outside, not very thick. It gets the name snake fruit because if you look at the skin, it looks very similar to how a snake skin looks. Okay? Almost scaly or spiny. Once you peel away or remove the outer skin, the inside fruit is eaten, and it's got kind of a sweet, slightly acidic, almost like an apple-like texture, kind of lightly crunchy. Not hard like an apple, but similar. Okay? I think it's easy to see why it's called a snake fruit too. I mean, it does look kind of like a snake's head, right? Star fruit. This is also called a carambola. So this is a species of fruit native to South Asia. It's got a pale green or yellow skin, very, very thin. It's easy to see why it's called a star fruit, shaped like a star. This fruit is quite sweet. It's very, very juicy. It can be eaten fresh. Okay, it's commonly eaten fresh. It can be turned into jams. It can be preserved. It can be dried. It can be juiced. So very, very common fruit, not only in Southeast Asia, but now in many parts of the world. Okay, so that's called a star fruit or carambola. Okay, now moving on past fruits. Straw mushroom. This is also called a paddy mushroom. This is a common mushroom found throughout Southeast Asia. It's also very commonly used in Thai cuisine, in curries, in soups. They grow wild in mushroom paddies or mushroom farms. They usually have a fairly long stem on them, although nowadays it's very common to see them picked and partially cooked like this or canned. So if you go to a wet market, for example, in Southeast Asia, you might find these in a bin of water, and they would just scoop out a bunch for you, put them in a bag of or if you drop your phone, or if you buy them canned, they'll come packed in water. You just drain off the water and then add it to your soup or add it to your curry. Okay, very, very common ingredient. Tamarind. So this is tamarind here. So this is a fruit pod that grows on a tree. This is also a very common ingredient. It's not something it's not sweet. So tamarind is quite bitter and sour a little bit. So this is used as an additive to soups, to curry pastes, to dips, to add a little bit of sourness to it. Okay. So tamarind can be either found fresh like this, or you can buy it in a paste, okay, a pre-made paste. And that's the most common way to find it nowadays, right? It's much more difficult to find it fresh like this, as it's mostly processed industrially and packaged and sold in supermarkets. Again, when you're using tamarind, you have to be quite delicate with it, because too much tamarind can make something very sour, and it also has a very distinct flavor. Tamarind has a very unique taste. Again, year 4, we'll make a lot of different things, from around Asia and South America and wherever, all over the place. We'll use tamarind, so you'll be able to really taste it and sort of feel how to use it properly. Okay. Up here on the right, that is turmeric. Turmeric is in the same family as galangal and ginger. It's also part of the rhizome family. So this grows underground. It's a tuberous root that we use for its vegetable, or its tuber, this part here. This is most commonly found in a powder form. Okay? Now around the world, powdered turmeric is incredibly common, although in Southeast Asia, turmeric is used for its flavor and its color. Okay? So this is used to make, for example, yellow curry paste. It's also added to flavor and color soups, and it's pureed and added to the soup or curry paste that it's being made into. Okay, so this is used extensively for its flavor and its color. But nowadays, as I mentioned, finding fresh turmeric is not as easy, so most people just use dried turmeric powder because that's the most convenient, most readily available product to them. But in Southeast Asia, it is quite easy to find fresh turmeric. Okay? And that's it. Boom! This is Wakanda. We don't do that here. Perfect. All right. Don't forget, next week, we have the same class time for studying ingredients. Okay? Hygiene and safety is 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock. Yeah? Hygiene and safety, 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock in this room. Miller, don't worry. Studying ingredients, same time next week. Hygiene and safety, 2 to 4. Got it? Got it? Don't forget to check the e-learning. I will let you know once the tests are published on e-learning, so you can check the opening date and the opening time. I will also publish and post the study material in PowerPoint form for you for your final exams within the next week or a week and a half, so you have a few weeks to look through it yourself before we do it in class. I advise that you look through it yourself before we come to class. Yeah? Self-study is a very critical tool for you to use. All right? Have a good day. See you later. See you next week. If I don't see you before, come on. I'll see you Monday, right? Yeah? And who else is coming? I forgot. But he doesn't have hours, right? He just wants to do it. Oh, yeah. Don't forget to bring your cards, right? You have a card, right? I have to sign this, right?